I am pleased to welcome the writer-director behind the new sci-fi drama Roswell Delirium, Richard Bakewell, and the film's star and producer Anthony Michael Hall. Um, Roswell Delirium is a different kind of sci-fi movie with more of a focus on family drama, the fragile nature of memory, and a broader allegory about public relations during crisis. Richard, what inspired you to wrap these themes into a UFO story? And were you at all trepidatious about drawing some key parallels to the pandemic when the world was still grappling with what that all meant?
Well, if you really listen carefully when you're watching the film, there are a lot of references to the pandemic because I was supposed to make this film as a short, and then I couldn't because of the shutdown that happened and no filming allowed in LA or anywhere. So I wrote it into a feature. And so, of course, I was very inspired by the pandemic. So there are things like you hear throughout, like, at one point, the father of Mayday says, if you want to keep your distance. You can be 6 feet, apart from me. So I mean, there's all those little correlations of the pandemic and the scare tactics and the cough. People are scared to get the cough in the film instead of COVID. So there's a lot of similarities that I kind of drew upon because those things that we were living throughout the day, and I really wanted to kind of make it comfortable in a sense, and also familiar for people who were kind of like in that era of the 80s, but then they can kind of relate to all these things that are kind of like happening right now. It's like, well, this sounds very familiar because I'm actually living this 2020 experience, but now we're back in the 80s and then living it, but it's very parallel to two worlds, absolutely.
Well, it seemed like there was almost sort of a hesitancy during, while we were going through that collective, like, wild time. But I mean, this film, I think, was finished in 2023, right? So you had been working on it like right in the thick of it. So was there any hesitancy of like, I'm kind of tackling these issues head on as an allegory, but they're still very much the keep your distance, wear a mask, all that stuff. It's not that you were directly saying this is wrong, but it seemed like you were coming at an angle that the rest of popular culture wasn't quite ready to deal with.
Right. And, I think more or less a lot of people did not really agree with things, whether you agreed with them wearing the mask or not. But like in the film, they people had to like live that life because of the radiation. So that was, something that they were experiencing. And, I really just tried to, basically take all those elements and kind of make them part of the story. And it was never my goal intentionally. Again, I was just trying to survive financially during that time because there was no work. And then I'm like, well, I can't really do anything, so I'm going to do all these projects. I was going to the Salton Sea, in the summer and trying to get inspired just to write to kind of stay sane. And that was really my goal through the whole process. And in making this film, we kind of got hammered 3 times. We started with I was going to make it as a short. That didn't happen. Then it became a feature. We finished the film in September of 23, and we couldn't promote it or show it because of the strike. And then, we were going to release it in January, and then the fires happened the same week. So we really had all these things stacked against us, but this film is still here, and we're going strong and getting it out there. So.
Excellent. Well, speaking of different, Anthony, I haven't seen you play a character quite like Jerry Baskin. I know you played a buttoned up authority figure in The Class a few years ago, but this time there's no comedy in the character or the situations he finds himself in. What attracted you to the role, and how did you approach the character?
Well, first of all, the script, I was really intrigued by Rick's writing. I think one of the things that's interesting about it is there's a lot of layers. It has its own sort of timeline. We go from the present to the past. Um, I just was really intrigued by the writing. I thought it was a really good script. I liked what he had done, and there's a lot of interesting kind of slow reveals and interesting themes throughout the film, which were compelling and interesting to me. In terms of the role, I'm someone I've actually been in therapy in my life, at different times, and I can appreciate that. It's a very interesting thing when you're in that environment. I think most therapists, I'm sure, are trained to sort of actively listen, right? And it's a very important technique for actors as well. So it was a very interesting role. I think without leading Ashton's character Mayday when she's an adult and she's in my group therapy session, you can't lead with any kind of leading questions, so to speak. But what's interesting is I think there's a softness in Jerry's heart where he's compelled by her experience and he's really intrigued. He's trying to help her in, I think, sort of a paternal way. So I think it's an interesting role. I wanted to just bring a calmness to it and be a a source of strength for her character. And I think as the story develops in the third act, what you see is this is something we actually came up with together, that he actually goes so far as to take her to this place in the final scene, where I don't want to give it away, but there's a very compelling scene between the mother and the daughter, played by Ariana and Ashton. And I think it sets the stage for that, because I think what happens, which kind of surprises his character, is that he learns that he has feelings for this girl. He really does care about her, and he's trying to see her through. In the course of the sessions in the therapy, I think what he's trying to do is kind of bring these people back from their experiences, whether they're misremembering any sort of alien experiences or not. And what's interesting with Rick's script is that there's a lot of themes built in, but ultimately what evolves is, I think, a story between a mother and a daughter, and it's really about them kind of reclaiming each other in a way. She's trying to find herself throughout this experience of what she's been through, both with the fallout from the nuclear testing, but the whole thing with the aliens and all that is, it's kind of a lure in a way, because really what it's really about is the mother's mental health and how she dealt with her daughter and tried to protect her despite being in a challenging relationship with her father, and there's some domestic violence there, and a lot of things are sort of inferred and very subtly brought up. So I was really impressed with the script and also the writing that Rick did, and the fact that it was very character driven. And I liked my role a lot. I enjoyed that. I liked playing a therapist who could really actively listen, because that's, as you know, what they're trained to do. And I was very impressed by just all the performances. Everybody that we brought to that Rick cast. We had a great group of young actors, as you saw, that were really fun. Um, and then, of course, Ashton and Ariana just were really fantastic in the film. So the fact that we had all these other great actors, it was just icing on the cake. We had Dee Wallace Stone, and we had Reginald Vell Johnson, and Lisa Whelchel and Sam Jones all showed up for us. But I think everybody was really intrigued and compelled by the script. Yeah.
I want to go back to something you said. You've been in therapy, so not to get it crazy personal, but as an actor, is there any part of you that is kind of studying those sessions? Like, if I ever need to play a character like this someday, I'm going to take some notes. And can you compartmentalize that with the help that you're trying to get actively in those sessions?
Well, see, that's the thing too. Without getting into personal stuff, like it's really about the interesting aspect of like how therapists are trained to actively listen. So, I think there's a thing that people go through. I know I did, and I don't mind sharing this. Where the therapist isn't your friend, right? But they're trained there to help you, and they're trying to help guide you, but you got to do the work. So, and Ashton was really great in those scenes because she's coming to grips with her own past, her own love for her mother, the fact that she grew up in an abusive household, as you saw in the story, and she's dealing with a lot of the pain and the kind of remnants of what her mother's been through. And I think that's very interesting stuff to deal with. So ultimately, my character, is a support for her, which I think is a surprise to him. And this is something that Rick and I came up with. We actually added that, where there's a scene towards the end of the picture where I really kind of I'm there for her in a way that maybe kind of transcends a typical sort of doctor and patient relationship. But it was interesting stuff to work with. Yeah.
Cool. Rick, you've built quite a career as a cinematographer. And I read recently that you filmed the Blue Origin launch.
Yes.
Is that of a piece with your fascination with space and the unknown, or was it just a cool gig?
Well, I was offered this gig a while ago, and I was like, I'm gonna cancel everything just to do this because I'm very space driven, and years ago I actually passed on filming the final NASA space launch. I didn't know that I was passing on the job, but I had a friend coming to town, and then I was like, oh, I can't do these days in Florida, and then my other friend went there instead of me, and then he got on the cover of a few magazines because they were filming it, and I'm like, oh, I really should have been there. I didn't know what I was actually turning down. So I think for me, like growing up as a kid in the '80s, and seeing a Challenger launch, in the classroom, and the impact I had on the teachers, like it's something that always impacted me very heavily, even when I talked about it in the classroom scene with the kids when we shot that. I was trying to like tell them, explain what happened, and talk about Kristen McAuliffe, and I got very emotional. I'm like, wow, I can't even believe I'm getting this upset. You know, but like I've always been a fan of space, shuttles, you know, Star Wars, kind of any kind of thing space related. I'm just like, you got me. So
Mhm.
It's funny for people, I think, of our generation, that that Challenger thing was is a big kind of a psychic milestone. So when you're talking to these kids who are, you know, 40 years or whatever removed from that, did they have any kind of could they relate at all, or was it just, oh, this is something that happened, you know, when my parents were kids, or were they able to kind of tap into that fear? Did it resonate at all with them?
I think a few of them it did. You know, I think it was the second day of filming. We shot that Challenger scene,
Wow.
and I didn't know if we were ever gonna get clearance from NASA to use it. It took a long time. It took like 7 months up until like almost time to make the film because it was just like so many people involved to get approval. And you know, right before we filmed it, I basically showed a video of Christian McCall to let the kids know who this person was. That it's not just like no, you know, empty bodies in a spaceship. This is real people who were in there. This is a teacher, and a lot of them really resonated with the fact that this person was such a giving person, and people spoke so highly of her. And a couple of the kids really got upset, like Kylie and Caden. They were kind of in tears. They just when they saw that for the first time, we shot it in a wide shot, and like you could just see people reacting, and it was just like they watched it before because they knew that was going to be in the film, but like up until then it didn't impact them and mean anything until they could put like a face to like that was on the Challenger, so that really just did something for them.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that, and thank you both for hanging out and talking a bit about the film. Roswell Delirium is now available to rent and own on streaming and on classic retro physical media for us who still appreciate those things. So, yeah, thank you very much, guys.
Ian, thank you for the time. We appreciate you.
All
Thanks.
right, take care. Hey everyone, Ian here. I know, long time no see. But if you like the video you just watched, feel free to subscribe to Kicking the Seat right here, and also check out the playlist and recommended video right here. Thanks for watching.